All right, this the fourth class, the fall semester, Bible prophets. And we looked at the book of Joel, and today we'll start with the book of Amos. Amos is an unusual character in the Bible in that he really wasn't a prophet. He was a farmer whom God called to go up to Bethel. Now, Bethel was a city in the northern kingdom. Remember, after the divided kingdom occurred, the first king of the north was Jeroboam, and one of the first things he did was set up idol worship. One at the tribe of Dan and one at Bethel, which is in the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim is a pretty short distance from Jerusalem, from Judah, the southern kingdom. In fact, it almost would have bordered the southern kingdom. The name Amos means burden. And what I believe this shows us is God's burden for Judah and Israel. The kingdoms are divided at this stage. The northern kingdom never did right as far as the kingdom's concerned. There were individuals of the north who were believers, and so there were, like I say, several good people up there. But as a nation, none of the kings, they had 20 kings of the north, none of the kings did the right thing. Judah, on the other hand, had 20 rulers, and about 8 kings of those from time to time did the right thing. Some did really good, some did pretty good, but the other 12 rulers of the south all did bad. Tekoa is about 5 miles from Bethlehem. This is where Amos was from. And so this distance he had to travel would not have been a great distance from his farm up to the northern kingdom. Bethlehem, based on a map, I guess, from you look at a map, saw Jerusalem, Bethlehem would be to the east of Jerusalem, not too awful far away. And by today's standards, not that far at all. Back in those days, travel was a little bit harder. But he was a herdsman and a gatherer of sycamore fruit. Not everybody is called, word that's right. We're all called to be in the ministry full time, right? Meaning that our life was always to be serving God. Some are called into a ministry as such, like a pastor, whereas some are called to be a Christian hairdresser. And that's your ministry. There's a lot of people you talk with on a daily basis that they know you, your testimony, ministering to them. So that's your mission field. We're all called into, like I say, full-time ministry, but here his ministry was to work the farm, provide food, different things, and to minister to those around him at his workplace, in a sense. But there's sometimes God calls there's terms called the clergy and the lay people, the clergy of the ministry, the lay people, everybody else in church. I don't like those terms because they're actually Catholic terms, but I guess that you can see a difference anyway. That in your church you have the people on staff at your church; they're in the ministry. Everybody else goes to church there. Well, sometimes just your average church person is called out to do something for God, not just a minister or a pastor or whatever it might be. And this is the case here with Amos.
I remember I remember us discussing this before, and we said that God can use just plain old ordinary people
exactly.
to do His will.
Yeah. You don't have to, like say, be a pastor to witness to somebody. Over the years, there's a lot of people who've called our church to ask the pastor if he'd come witness to their family member, or at one time, one guy called me up and wanted to know if I'd witness to his child because he said my son wants to get saved. And when I talked to him, yeah, absolutely. But then I thought, how sad it was, because you don't have opportunity to lead your own child to the Lord. If you can't do that, there's a problem there. You know, and so, you know, anyway, but Amos here was to be a prophet to the whole house of Jacob, meaning the northern and southern kingdoms. But chiefly, at this point, his ministry was to go to the northern kingdom, to Bethel. His message, basically, a 3-point outline: sin, separation, and sanctification. And what an important message this is. A great outline. You want to teach a Sunday school class, you can take these 3 words and teach a whole class out of this. The importance of understanding what sin is, and that we're all sinners. Then once you get saved, you're to separate yourself from the world, and then sanctification is to separate unto God. You know, so very importantly, so Amos' job was to tell them that what sin is, and when you get saved, you separate yourself from that, but more importantly, separate yourself unto God. His reign was during the days of Uzziah. Uzziah, for the most part, was a good king. For many years, he was a really good king. And then pride got the best of him. Got the best of him because he would go and offer up a sacrifice in the temple, which he was not allowed to do that. Only the priest could do that, this type of sacrifice. I mean, you could offer sacrifice up outside of the temple. There wasn't anything wrong with that. I've heard people say that Saul usurped the authority of the priest when he offered up a sacrifice instead of that Samuel. No, not true. Why? Because Samuel wasn't a priest. Samuel was raised by the priest, Eli, but he was not a priest. He was a prophet. So it wasn't that it was wrong for Saul to offer up a sacrifice. What was wrong was God told him to wait for Samuel to come back and offer up a sacrifice. Where on this one, clearly Uzziah was at fault because he offered up a sacrifice, and God gave him leprosy because of this. I don't think King Saul was saved, and some people will argue that. I don't see it. One of the reasons I don't see it is because when Uzziah offered up improper sacrifice, God gave him leprosy. And we know Uzziah was a good king. When Saul did it, really nothing happened to him after that. I mean, God's hand wasn't on him, but there was no punishment directly for that sin. Why? Because God only punishes his kids. You know, you don't punish your neighbor's kids, you punish your own. During this time, or at this time, it says 2 years before the great earthquake, mighty earthquake. Back in those days, they didn't have calendars like we have. You know, I think I've even said this in class before, you know, that if you happen to go to Israel and you walk down the road, you found a coin dated 25 BC. Would that coin be valuable? Yeah, the answer is no. Why? They didn't know when BC was going to be. They didn't know when 25 BC. So obviously it's a fake coin.
Oh, a trick question.
Yeah, it's a fake coin because that didn't happen. In fact, I think it wasn't up until several hundred years. I'm almost thinking even close to the 1500s when they started putting dates on coins. So if you found a coin dated 300 AD, it's a fake as well. You know? So what did they do to measure time back then? Well, a lot of times it was certain events. You know, they did have calendars, and they could keep the months. You know, the lunar calendar is what we use a solar calendar. The Jews use a lunar calendar. That's why there's a little bit difference. So why sometimes Easter is in March, and then next month is in April, or next year it's in April. Zechariah referred to this earthquake 250 years later, so you know it was a big deal there. Josephus, who was an early Jewish historian, right? Early Jewish historian. He wasn't a Christian, and some of his writings aren't accurate. But it is a good history book. You can look up Josephus, Flavius Josephus was his name. And his works are out there on the internet. You can find them, download them. It's got some good history. He tells us that the earthquake happened when God punished Uzziah. And it might have been that, but again, that's Josephus' opinion or his guess as to what's going on. Jeroboam the second. Now, remember, we call him Jeroboam the second. The Bible doesn't call him that. All right? We know that there were two different kings of the north by the name of Jeroboam. The first king was Jeroboam. I think this might have been the 12th or the 13th king of the north. Maybe 13th, I'm not sure. But like I say, definitely wasn't. The Bible doesn't say Jeroboam the second. We call him that just to distinguish between the two. Behold, this was iniquity of thy sister Sodom. This is out of Ezekiel, but God here is chastening not only the northern kingdom, which Amos has left the south to go up to the north to preach against, but the sins of Israel and Judah, the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, both were great. And God even says later on in Ezekiel is right before the captivity, or during the captivity, Judah. But God says this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. He's talking to the southern kingdom at this point, but the northern kingdom as well, with like the book of Hosea and the wickedness going on in there, and comparing God's people, Israel, with Sodom and Gomorrah. And likes them and says, this was the sin of your sister, Sodom. And then he goes and tells what the sin is. And I think it's something we need to really appreciate and understand from God's Word, is that the judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't a judgment against homosexuality. That was not the sin. The sin was threefold, found in Ezekiel 16:49. It says, this is the sin of Sodom. First of all, pride. Pride. We are in a world today that is just based on pride. Arrogance, no matter what. Pride, fullness of bread, you can call it prosperity. One of the problems in the world today is that we are a very prosperous world. We live in a very prosperous nation. We are so used to things. When I was a kid, there was, the town I grew up in, there was one Corvette. And every once in a while I would get to see it because it was near school. In fact, this school I went to, the guy lived on that street. So he had a 63 Corvette, I remember that. Because it was a big deal to see that. I mean, Corvette. And now it's more common to see it, unless you're a car guy, you might even notice if it's a Corvette anymore. And they're not even the expensive ones. Nowadays you got people spending $200,000-300,000 or more on cars that are pieces of junk that won't last them a year before they mess up. Because we're such a prosperous nation, they don't care. Just spend the money. And I mean, that's, you can spend $500,000, $10 million on some cars. Some guys spend $10-15 million on a car that they park in their basement and never drive again because they don't want to put miles on. Because of prosperity. We have too much. And we have so much that we don't have to rely upon God anymore.
Bentley just came out with a new car. It's $2 million and they don't even have a hood.
Yeah.
It's causing the rain. I mean,
Yeah. Did you order one?
no, yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. I don't want a Bentley, I don't want a Ferrari, I don't want a Lamborghini, I don't want any of those things, because they're junk. I mean, they really are. If you look at the history of them, they are junk. You buy, what's that, Jean-Claude Van Damme, he bought a Bentley. And I forget, it was like $500,000-600,000, maybe more than that when he bought it. And the guy that just bought it, I think paid like $40,000 for it. And it's not that old, it's crazy. But that's the problem, we got too much abundance of idleness was in her hands, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. And so we could label this last one, in fact, I always have a 3-point outline for this. Pride, prosperity, and neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Prejudice. Looking upon others. And not just racial prejudice, but prejudice, poor and needy. I mean, Jeff Bezos is worth, I think last count, $137 billion. I don't know if that's the figure I used. I know I looked up one figure and I calculated. I think he was 47 years old, or 57. But anyway, from his life right now, if he lived to be 100, he could spend $12 million a day, every single day, and not run out of money. And that's not even counting the future growth that he has, and interest money and all that. It's just way too much money. I don't have a problem with him making that much money, because if you can do it, fine. But they could do a whole lot more with that money than building a rocket going up, so he can say he's an astronaut. It's crazy. Like I said, I don't have any problem with him spending money like he wants to spend it, but
Is he the one that's building the tunnel underground to go from New York to, I don't know where he's supposed to go, but this is a train that travels underground.
Bill Gates is doing something out in a town out west. I can't remember which it was, in Texas or some town. He's actually building a whole town. His goal was to build a whole town at one point. I don't know if that's what you're talking about or not.
This was a train traveling underground.
Well, and I don't even have a problem with that. To be honest with you, if he could build this train and make let people travel safely from across the country, that'd be a great idea. But there's a lot of people out there that could use the money in a proper way, and not just handouts, but job benefits they could have. But anyway, that's the problem. That was a sin of Sodom: pride, prosperity, prejudice. That's the sin of the world today, not just America. It's the sin of the world today. And what happened to Sodom? They got judged. What's happening to us? I don't think we're going to be judged by God, because I think we're already being judged by God. I mean, we're suffering today because of these things. So the devastating judgment, God's prediction of what's going to happen to Israel of the north. Remember, they went into captivity in 722 BC, 110 years before, 115 years before the southern kingdom would go into captivity. And a prediction of what's going to happen to Israel, but there's also a prediction of what God was going to do with the Gentiles. And later on in the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15, when Peter and James and Paul and Barnabas have to deal with the issue of prejudice in the early church, they quote Amos. James, I think, quoted Amos, that the gospel would go to the Gentiles as well. I'm going to go ahead and take a break there.
Well, hello, guys.
Well,